The bell above the door of Ellison's Dry Goods and Fine Tailoring rang at 3 on a Tuesday afternoon in March, and Violet Ellison did not look up from the seam she was finishing. This was not rudeness. It was the arithmetic of a woman who ran a shop alone. The seam required another 40 seconds. The customer could wait 40 seconds, and any customer who could not wait 40 seconds for a woman doing precise work was not a customer she particularly needed. Her father had taught her this. Her father had also taught her double-entry bookkeeping, the correct tension for a French seam, and the inadvisability of making decisions under social pressure, all of which had proven more useful than anything else she had learned in 26 years of living in Savannah. She finished the seam, she set it down. She looked up. The man standing in her shop was not one of her regular customers. She knew her regular customers the way she knew her inventory, completely by category, with the particular attention of someone whose livelihood depended on accurate assessment. This man she did not know. He was tall, somewhere in his early 40s, with the kind of physical bearing that suggested either military service or a childhood that had demanded it, and he was dressed in civilian clothes that fit him well enough, but carried, in the set of the shoulders and the precision of his posture, the ghost of a uniform. His face was angular and serious, the face of a man who spent more time thinking than speaking, and he was looking at the bolts of fabric along the east wall with the particular quality of a person who is present in a room, but not entirely certain why they came into it. "Good afternoon," Violet said. "Can I help you?" He turned. His eyes were dark, not black, a deep brown with grey at the edges, the colour of river water in November. They assessed her with the directness of someone who had stopped performing social pleasantries some years ago and had not missed them. "I need a coat," he said. "Winter weight, nothing decorative." "Winter is ending," she said. "I'm aware," he said. "I plan ahead." She looked at him for a moment. He looked back with the patient calm of a man accustomed to being looked at and finding it neither flattering nor troubling. She came out from behind the counter and moved toward the bolts of wool on the east wall. "What color?" she said. "Dark," he said. "I don't require specificity beyond that." "Most men don't," she said. "They're usually wrong about what dark means, though. Dark grey reads differently than dark navy, which reads differently than charcoal. Each one says something different about the person wearing it." She pulled a bolt of charcoal wool and held it toward the light from the front window. "This one says, 'I've stopped caring what you think.' That's usually the right choice." He looked at the fabric, then at her. "You assess your customers' characters through fabric selection?" "I assess what they want the fabric to say," she said. "Most people dress for the story they're telling about themselves. My job is to help them tell it accurately." She set the charcoal bolt on the counter. "Whether the story is accurate is their concern, not mine." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile exactly, the suggestion of one briefly before it was collected back into the serious face. "And what story does this one tell?" he said. "That you're a man who has decided his authority doesn't require announcement," she said. "That the coat is for function and not impression." She paused. "Which is consistent with arriving in my shop in plain clothes that fit you like a uniform." He was quiet for a moment. "You notice that?" "It's my job to notice how clothes sit on people," she said. "Yours sit like borrowed civilian dress. You're comfortable in them, but they're not your first language." He looked at her with the dark eyes. Not offended, something else. The quality of a man who has been told an accurate thing and is deciding what to do with its accuracy. "The charcoal," he said. "How long?" 2 weeks, she said. "I'll need your measurements." She took them with the same professional efficiency she brought to everything, tape measure and pencil, and the practiced speed of a woman who had been doing this since she was 14. He stood correctly for it, neither stiff nor collaborative, simply present. "Name for the order," she said. "Whitfield," he said. "James Whitfield." She wrote it in the order book. "I'll send word when it's ready, Mr. Whitfield." He paid the deposit without discussion of the price, which was, in her experience, either the sign of a man with considerable money or a man who had decided the price was fair and did not require negotiation. She suspected it was both. He left. She returned to the seam she had been finishing and did not think about him further, which was entirely true for approximately 45 minutes, after which she found herself reconsidering the shoulder measurement and whether she had taken it correctly, and told herself firmly that this was a professional concern and nothing else. It was a professional concern. It was also something else. She was honest enough to note both. He came back on Thursday. Not to check on the coat. It had been 2 days, the coat was nowhere near ready, and he had not sent word ahead. He simply appeared at 20 minutes past 3, the bell above the door ringing at the same time as Tuesday, and stood in her shop with the same quality of presence that was not quite purposeful and not quite casual, somewhere between the two. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, "the coat won't be ready for another 10 days. "I know," he said, "I was in the area." She looked at him. He looked back with the patient calm. She returned to her work. He stayed for 20 minutes, examining the fabric bolts with the focused attention of a man who had decided this was what he was doing, and then he left, and she did not remark on it. The following Tuesday, he was back at 20 minutes past 3. By the second week, she had stopped noting the arrivals as unusual and had begun instead to arrange her afternoon work accordingly. The tasks that required silence and concentration in the morning, the tasks that could accommodate conversation in the afternoon, this was a practical decision. It was also, she was honest enough to admit, not entirely practical. She was a woman who had survived 4 years of war and 2 years of its aftermath, in a city that had been occupied and reorganized and was still reorganizing, and she had developed in those years the particular skill of honest self-assessment that comes from needing to know exactly what you have available and what you do not. What she had available was a shop her father had left her, a competence she had built from the ground up, and a mind she had always trusted. What she did not have was certainty about the man who appeared in her shop every Tuesday and Thursday at 20 minutes past 3 without a plausible reason, and stayed for exactly as long as the conversation lasted. She did not examine this too carefully. She was, by long practice, a woman who knew the cost of examining things too carefully. What she knew was this. He listened to her the way she had never been listened to in a dry goods shop in Savannah, Georgia, as if what she said had weight and required genuine response. He disagreed with her twice in the first week, which she found more interesting than agreement would have been. He had opinions about things she would not have expected him to have opinions about, and they were not the opinions she would have predicted, and this also she filed away. She did not know he was a general. She did not know he was the commanding officer of the Army's Department of the South, responsible for the military administration of Georgia and the Carolinas during Reconstruction, the man whose orders had more direct effect on the daily lives of Savannah's residents than anyone except possibly God and the weather. She simply knew he came on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 20 minutes past 3, and that the coat was going to be finished early because she had been giving it more than the usual attention, and that she was not examining why. The correction happened on a Thursday in April. He was not alone when he came in on the Thursday it happened. He was accompanied by 2 men she did not know, younger, one of them in the particular pressed and anxious state of a person who worked for someone they found intimidating, the other with the easy confidence of a man who had grown up with money and had never been required to revise his opinion of himself. The confident one she recognized after a moment, Arthur Pembroke, the son of one of Savannah's older cotton families, currently attempting to position himself as a liaison between the remaining planter class and the military administration. She had heard his name, she had not previously put a face to it. Pembroke was talking when they came through the door, which was apparently his natural state. The point being that the tax structure as implemented is simply not viable for the kind of agricultural recovery the region requires. The Bureau's numbers are wrong, and anyone who has actually read the 39th Congress's preliminary report on... "Good afternoon, Miss Ellison," Whitfield said, which stopped Pembroke mid-sentence. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, "your coat is ready." She brought it from the back room, charcoal wool, clean lines, nothing decorative, and helped him into it with the same professional attention she gave everything. It sat on his shoulders the way she had cut it to sit, correctly, without effort, as if it had always been there. She walked around him once. She adjusted the left shoulder half an inch. "The Bureau's numbers," Pembroke resumed, apparently considering the pause in conversation a temporary interruption rather than a conclusion, "are based on pre-war agricultural valuations that bear no relationship to current land productivity. The Freedmen's Bureau report from January of this year." The January report used the 1860 census agricultural data as a baseline, Violet said, without looking up from the button she was examining on the coat's lower hem. "Which is incorrect. The 1860 data was already 3 years old when it was compiled and undercounted the productive acreage in the coastal counties by approximately 12%. The correct baseline is the 1857 State Survey, which the Bureau's regional officers appear not to have read. Silence. She looked up. All three men were looking at her. Whitfield with the dark eyes that were giving nothing away. Pembroke with the expression of a man who has been corrected by a person he had not been addressing and is deciding how to receive it. The anxious young man with the look of someone watching a thing happen that he does not entirely understand. "You've read the January report," Whitfield said. Not a question. "I've read most of the Bureau's public reports," she said. "They affect the economic conditions that affect my suppliers, which affects my inventory, which affects my business. Staying informed is practical." She returned to the button. "The 1857 survey is in the State Archives on Bull Street. It's available to anyone who looks for it." Pembroke recovered himself. "The 1857 survey is a pre-war document that reflects actual land productivity before wartime disruption," she said, "which is exactly what you'd want as a baseline for calculating recovery rates." She looked at him directly. "Using the 1860 census data instead is either an error or a choice. If it's a choice, I'd be curious about whose interests it serves." Pembroke's face did something complicated. Whitfield looked at her with the dark eyes for a long moment. Then he looked at the coat in the mirror behind her counter. "It fits well," he said. "It should," she said. "I cut it to fit." He paid for the coat. He thanked her. He left with the two men, and she heard Pembroke say something in a lowered voice as the door closed, and she did not catch the words, but caught the tone, which was the tone of a man recalibrating a situation he had not expected. She returned to her work. It was 2 days later that Mrs. Hargrove, who came in every other Friday for alterations, mentioned in the conversational way that Mrs. Hargrove mentioned everything that she had heard General Whitfield had been seen at Ellison's on Thursday. Violet set down her scissors. "I beg your pardon," she said. "General James Whitfield," Mrs. Hargrove said with the patient tone of someone providing information to a person who clearly needs it. "Commander of the Department of the South. He's been in Savannah since January." She paused. "Very serious man. They say he doesn't smile at social events." She paused again with the quality of a pause that is doing work. "Though I understand he comes here rather often." Violet picked up her scissors. She finished Mrs. Hargrove's alterations with the same steady hands she always used, and she said nothing about General Whitfield, and she thought about a man who had stood in her shop for 6 weeks under a name that was his name and a civilian coat that was his coat, and had listened to her assess his character through fabric selection without correcting her misapprehension. She thought about what she had said to Pem in front of a man whose bureau report he had been criticized. She thought, with the particular clarity of a woman who has always trusted her own judgment and is currently reassessing a significant application of it, about what it meant that he had said nothing. He came back on Tuesday at 20 minutes past 3. She was behind the counter when he came in, and she looked up with the same practical attention she gave everyone, and she said, "General Whitfield." He stopped just inside the door. "Mrs. Hargrove," she said. "She comes in every other Friday." "I see," he said. "For you let me talk about the Bureau's reports in front of you for 6 weeks," she said, "without mentioning that you were the one responsible for them." He came to the counter. He set his hat on it, the same gesture he used when he was preparing to say something real rather than something social. She had catalogued this without knowing she was cataloguing it, the way she catalogued everything that mattered. "So you were saying accurate things," he said. "The 1857 survey is the correct baseline. I had already identified the error. You identified it independently and said so in front of a man who would have preferred you didn't." Something in his face. I found I was not interested in interrupting that. She looked at him. "You could have told me who you were." "I could have," he agreed. "I chose not to." A pause. "When I walked into this shop in March, I was a man who had been addressed as General for 4 consecutive years and had largely forgotten what it sounded like to be spoken to as a person rather than a rank. You spoke to me as a person." He held her eyes. "I was not willing to correct it." She was quiet for a moment. She received this the way she received real things, with her full attention without looking away from it. "That seems," she said, "like a decision with consequences you didn't fully calculate." "I calculated them," he said. "I found them acceptable. The consequence being that I told you the Bureau's reports were wrong." "You were right," he said. "I've already issued a correction to the January report citing the 1857 survey." A pause. "Your name is not in it. I considered putting it in and decided it would create complications you hadn't asked for. She looked at him. You corrected a federal report based on something I said in a dry goods shop. Based on something you said that was correct, he said. The location doesn't affect the accuracy. She looked at him for a long moment. This man who had stood in her shop for 6 weeks as a civilian because he had wanted to be spoken to plainly, who had listened to her criticize his own administration's reports and then corrected them, who had decided to protect her from the credit because he understood that credit in Savannah in 1867 was also exposure. You should have told me, she said. Yes, he said immediately without defense, I should have. She picked up the order book. Do you need anything else made, General? Whitfield, he said. She looked up. James, he said, if we're revising the arrangement. She looked at him steadily. He looked back with the patient calm that was simply the form his character took, not waiting for a particular answer, simply present for whatever the honest one was. I have an order of linen that came in yesterday, she said. I've been trying to determine whether it's correctly described as pale grey or very light blue. The supplier calls it dove, which is entirely unhelpful. She pulled the sample from the shelf behind her and set it on the counter. What do you see? He looked at it. He considered it with the same focused attention he gave everything. Neither, he said. It's the color of river fog at 5 in the morning. She looked at the fabric. She looked at him. That's the most accurate description I've received, she said. I told you, he said, I plan ahead. She put the fabric back. She returned to her work. He stayed for 20 minutes and then left, and the bell above the door rang, and the shop was quiet. She noted, no longer uncertain about what the Tuesday and Thursday visits were. She further noted, not unhappy about this. The months that followed had the quality of something being built with care, not rushed, not performed, constructed with the attention of 2 people who had each learned, through different varieties of difficulty, that honest foundations were the only kind worth having. He came to the shop, they talked. He asked questions that deserved real answers and received them. She asked questions in return, because she was not a woman who withheld her curiosity, and he answered with the directness that was simply his nature, not warmly at first, warmth coming gradually, the way warmth came to things that had been cold for a long time, slowly, and then all at once. She learned the shape of him in pieces. The war had taken something from him that he was still locating, not his competence, which was intact and formidable, but his belief in the possibility of the ordinary evening, the conversation that was not strategy, the room that did not require management. He had spent 4 years in rooms that required management and had forgotten, somewhere in the middle of it, what rooms felt like when they did not. She provided this without deciding to. She talked to him about the shop and about the fabric suppliers and about the economic conditions of Savannah's recovery with the same honest practicality she brought to everything, and he received it the way a man receives water when he has been a long time without it, as necessary, as real as the thing that was actually required. He told her one Thursday in June that he had been present at the siege of Atlanta. He said it not as a war story. She had heard enough war stories from enough men to last several lifetimes, but as a fact about where he had been and who that had made him. She listened without performing sympathy, which she understood he would not want, and without the slightly frightened deference that powerful men sometimes provoked and that she had never been capable of producing toward anyone. You don't find the rank intimidating, he said once in July. It was an observation, not a complaint. I found it inconvenient, she said, for about 2 days after Mrs. Hargrove told me. Then I decided it was irrelevant. He looked at her. Why irrelevant? Because I had already formed my opinion of you, she said. The rank didn't change what I had observed. It added context, but context isn't the same as new information. She set down the seam she was working. You listen when someone is talking. You say what you think without ornamentation. You came back to the shop 12 times without a pretext because you couldn't construct a sufficient pretext and didn't want to lie. She looked at him directly. The rank doesn't change any of that. He was quiet for a long moment. 12 times, he said. I counted, she said. It's my shop, I count things. Something moved in his face. The not-quite smile she had been watching develop since March, fuller now, closer to the surface, the warmth that had been approaching gradually, suddenly very close. I came back 13 times, he said. You're including today. I'm including today, she agreed. He looked at her with the dark river water eyes. Then it was 13 times, he said, without a sufficient pretext. I know, she said. You knew before today, he said. You've known for weeks. Yes, she said. And you said nothing about it. Neither did you, she said. We were both being careful. He was quiet. Then, are we still being careful? She looked at him across the counter with its bolts of fabric and its order book, and the small ordinary things of her small ordinary work, and she thought about 6 months of Tuesday and Thursday afternoons and river fog at 5 in the morning, and a correction issued to a federal report based on something she had said in a dry goods shop. I think, she said, that being careful has run its course. Savannah in the summer of 1867 was a city that had not yet decided what it was becoming, which made it, like all cities in the process of becoming, alert to anything it could use to define itself. The presence of a Union general in its streets was already a daily reminder of the arrangement the war had produced. The presence of that general in a local seamstress's shop on a twice-weekly basis was a different kind of reminder, smaller, more personal, and therefore more useful to people who needed to feel that the old hierarchies were being violated in ways they could name. The story organized itself the way stories organize themselves in occupied cities, quickly, efficiently, with the particular energy of people who understood that a narrative about a general and a working woman was a narrative they could use. Violet was aware of it before it arrived in her shop, the way she was aware of most things, peripherally through the small signals that preceded direct confrontation, the slight change in how certain customers greeted her, the conversation that stopped a beat too late when she entered a room, the particular quality of Mrs. Pemberton's expression at the Wednesday market. She had expected it. She had not expected the form it would take. The form it took was a visit, on a Thursday morning in late August, from 3 women she knew. Not well. She knew them as customers, as participants in the social life of Savannah's better families, as women who had grown up with the specific certainties of a world that was being reorganized and had not yet made their peace with the reorganization. They arrived together, which told her everything about the nature of the visit, and they wore the expressions of women who have decided they are doing something kind. Mrs. Beaumont, the eldest, spoke first. We've come because we're concerned, she said, about you, about the situation. What situation? Violet said. She was measuring a length of muslin, and she continued measuring. Your association with General Whitfield. Mrs. Beaumont's voice was warm. This was the variety of warmth that Violet had learned to identify as precisely the wrong temperature. We understand that a man of his position may have been attentive, and that for a woman in your circumstances that kind of attention could seem... Mrs. Beaumont, Violet said. She set down the muslin. She looked at the 3 women with the direct attention she gave to all things that required it. I appreciate that you've come. I understand what you're trying to tell me. I want to save us all some time by telling you that I am aware of the General's position, and I am aware of my own position, and I have found both of them irrelevant to the question of whether his company is worth having. Mrs. Beaumont's warmth adjusted itself. The concern, she said carefully, is for your reputation. In a town like this, with the current climate. The concern, said the second woman less carefully, is that people are talking and what they're saying is not kind. What are they saying? Violet said. A pause. The third woman looked at the window. The second looked at the floor. Mrs. Beaumont held her gaze with the expression of someone who has decided to see this through. That you have been strategic, Mrs. Beaumont said. That a woman in your position, a shop owner, a woman without family connections, might see an advantage in cultivating the attention of a man with military authority. That the relationship serves your business interests. A pause. And other things, less charitable things. Violet heard this. She stood with it for a moment, which was the time it required. The shop's accounts are public record, she said. Anyone curious about whether my business interests have changed since March can examine them. They haven't. She picked up the muslin. As for the less charitable things, I assume you mean that people believe the relationship is improper. She looked at Mrs. Beaumont. Is that what you believe? I believe, Mrs. Beaumont said carefully, that what I believe is less important than what can be demonstrated, and that in the current climate, a woman in your position cannot afford to give people material for stories. I have been giving people material for stories my entire life, simply by existing in the position I exist in, Violet said. That is not a new condition. and it is not one I can resolve by managing my associations." She looked at all three women. "I am grateful you came. I know it was meant well. But I am not willing to make myself smaller than I am in order to make other people comfortable, and I have not been willing to do this since I was 17 years old, and it is somewhat late to start." The three women left. Violet returned to the muslin. She was, she noted, not afraid. She was something more specific than afraid. She was the woman she had always been, standing in the shop her father had built, with the same practical honesty she had always brought to everything, and the question was not whether she was willing to pay the cost of that honesty, but whether the cost was one she could actually sustain. She was calculating this with the same clear-eyed precision she applied to her accounts when the bell above the door rang. James Whitfield came in at 20 minutes past 3. He looked at her face. He set his hat on the counter. "Tell me," he said. She told him. All of it, the three women, the warm concern that was not warm, the specific shape of what was being said. She told him the way she told him everything, directly, without self-pity, with the honest accounting of a woman who was used to managing her own crises and was informing him of this one as a matter of practical relevance. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "I should have been more careful," he said, "about being seen." "You didn't do anything improper," she said. "You came to a shop, you bought a coat." "I came to a shop 13 times without sufficient pretext," he said. "In a city where my presence is already a political statement, I should have been more careful about what my visits communicated." "Or," she said, "you could have been clear about what they communicated, which would have resolved the ambiguity." He looked at her. "The story people are telling," she said, "is the story that fills the space where a clear story isn't provided. If the situation were unambiguous, the story would have nothing to build from." She met his eyes. "I'm not asking you to make it unambiguous. I'm telling you that ambiguity is the problem, not the visits." He was quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet she had learned to read as thinking rather than withholding. "You are," he said, "the most direct person I have encountered in 20 years of public life." "I know," she said. "It's inconvenient sometimes." "No," he said. "It is not inconvenient." He held her eyes with a dark, steady gaze. "It is the reason I came back 13 times." The shop was quiet. Outside, Savannah moved through its August heat with the particular energy of a city conducting its ordinary business over the top of its extraordinary circumstances. Inside, two people stood across a counter with the accumulated weight of 6 months between them, and the clear understanding shared now that what they had been building had arrived at the point where it required a decision. "What are you saying?" she said. "I am saying," he said, "that I have been careful for 6 months, and careful has not served either of us well." He was entirely still, with the stillness that meant he was entirely present. "I am saying that the ambiguity you've described is a problem I can resolve, and that I would like to resolve it." A pause. "If you are willing." She looked at him. She was a woman who had survived a war and its aftermath, and 3 women with warm voices arriving in her shop to tell her to make herself smaller. She was also, she knew with the honest self-knowledge she had always trusted, a woman who had been falling in love with a man who appeared at 3:20 twice a week for 6 months, slowly, and then all at once, and who was standing in front of her now, asking if she was willing. "You need to understand," she said, "that I will continue to correct you when you're wrong." "I am counting on it," he said. "And I won't manage myself for the sake of how things appear." "I know," he said. "I wouldn't want you to." "And the shop is mine," she said. "My father built it. I built it further. That doesn't change." "It doesn't change," he agreed. He held her eyes. "Violet." Her name, just that. The same quality as everything he said, direct without ornamentation, the real thing offered plainly. "James," she said. He reached across the counter. She gave him her hand. He held it the way he held things he had decided to keep. "There is a political dinner," he said, "at the Pulaski House on Friday evening. I have been attending these events alone since January. I would like not to attend this one alone." A pause. "That would resolve the ambiguity." She looked at him. "That would create rather a different kind of story." "So yes," he said, "a story I am choosing to tell." His thumb moved against her hand once. "Will you come?" She looked at the shop, the bolts of fabric, the order book, the small practical machinery of the life she had built. She looked at the man who had told her she assessed his character through fabric selection and had found it accurate rather than impertinent. who had corrected a federal report because she had been right, who had come back 13 times. "I'll need something to wear," she said. "Give me until Friday afternoon." Something moved in his face, the full version of the not-quite smile, open and warm and making no effort to conceal itself. "I have every confidence," he said, "in your professional capabilities." She wore deep blue. Not aspirational, honest. The color that had been sitting in her inventory since July when she had ordered it for a customer who had subsequently moved to Atlanta and left the fabric behind. The color she had looked at several times and thought, not for a customer, for me. She had not yet found the occasion. She had found it now. The Pulaski house on Friday evening received Savannah's political and military establishment with the gaslit formality of an institution that had decided, regardless of the reorganization happening outside its doors, to maintain its standards. Violet arrived on James Whitfield's arm and understood, from the quality of the room's attention in the first 30 seconds, that they had successfully resolved the ambiguity. The story that replaced it was the story they had chosen to tell. The general and the seamstress who had corrected his reports, arriving together at a public dinner with the ease of two people who had decided something and were not apologizing for the decision. It was not the story Savannah had expected, which made it, in the social arithmetic of occupied cities, very nearly impossible to attack. You could not construct a narrative of impropriety around two people who had simply publicly chosen each other. Mrs. Beaumont was present. She looked at Violet with an expression that moved through several stages before settling on something that was, if not entirely warm, at least honest, the expression of a woman who has revised her assessment and is prepared to acknowledge the revision. Arthur Pembroke was also present. He looked at Violet with the expression of a man recalibrating for the second time in 6 months, and then at Whitfield, and then away, which was, she thought, the appropriate response. Whitfield introduced her to 3 people she did not know and one she did. Colonel Marcus Steen, the Army's regional liaison, who shook her hand and looked at her with the particular attention of a man who had heard about the woman who corrected the January report and was now meeting her in a context he had not anticipated. "Miss Ellison," Steen said, "I understand you identified the 1857 survey issue." "The baseline error was apparent once you looked for it," she said. "The survey is available to anyone in the state archives." "We are aware of that now," Steen said with the dry humor of a man who is capable of acknowledging institutional failure without excessive self-flagellation. "The general has been thorough in his correction." "He usually is," she said. Steen looked at her, then at Whitfield, then back at her with something that might have been approval. "Yes," he said, "I imagine he is." They ate. Violet talked to the people beside her at the table, a state assemblyman whose ideas about land reform were partly correct and partly 30 years behind the actual conditions, which she told him in terms that were, she thought, as diplomatic as she was capable of being. Whitfield, from across the table, watched this with the focused attention she recognized as his version of enjoyment. Afterward, in the carriage back to the street where she lived, he said, "You told Fletcher his land reform framework was outdated." "It is," she said. "The 1866 Civil Rights Act changed the applicable legal framework entirely. He's still reasoning from pre-war property law." "He is," he said. "I have been trying to communicate this to him for 3 months." A pause. "You communicated it in approximately 4 minutes over the fish course." "I don't have 3 months," she said. "I have a dinner." He looked at her. The carriage moved through the September night, the gaslit streets of Savannah passing the windows with the particular quality of a city that was, slowly, finding its way toward whatever it was becoming. "Violet," he said. She looked at him. "I intend," he said, "to ask you something. Not tonight. Tonight is for the dinner and its purposes, and I don't want to attach the question to a political function. But soon." He held her eyes. "I want you to know it's coming, so that when it comes, it's not a surprise." She looked at him. "You're giving me fair warning," she said. Something in his face. "Yes." "Before something pulls," she said. He was quiet for a moment, then, "I hope it won't pull." "It won't," she said. The carriage stopped at her street. He handed her down, as he always did, with the same formal correctness, and held her hand one moment past the formal occasion for it, which was not formal at all. "Tuesday," he said. 20 past 3, she said. He smiled. The complete version, warm and unguarded, the one she had been watching arrive since March, fully present now. He went back to the carriage. She went inside. She stood in the front room of the apartment above the shop and looked at the September darkness outside the window and felt the particular quality of something that had been moving toward her for a long time and had finally arrived, not crashing, not dramatic, simply present like weather that has been coming and has come. She was, she noted, not afraid of it. She was not afraid of anything he brought, which was, she thought, the most honest measure of what she knew about him. He came in on a Tuesday in October at 3:20. She was finishing an order, a set of curtains for a woman on Jones Street who had specific ideas about the weight of linen and had required 3 consultations to arrive at a specific idea that Violet could have given her in the first 5 minutes. She finished the final hem and set it down and looked up. He was standing in the shop with his hat in both hands and the quality of presence that was different from his usual arrivals. Still composed, always composed, but with a different variety of stillness. The stillness of a man who has prepared for something and is now at the moment of it. She came out from behind the counter. "The curtains are finished," she said. "Good," he said. He did not look at the curtains. "You're not here about the curtains," she said. "No," he said. She waited. He looked at her with the dark river water eyes, the same eyes she had looked up into on a Tuesday in March when she had not known who he was and had assessed him through the angle of his posture and the ghost of a uniform beneath his civilian coat. She knew him now. She knew the deliberateness and the dry precision and the warmth that lived behind the serious surface, and the man who had come back to an empty shop 13 times without sufficient pretext and had finally, on the 14th, told her why. "I have been constructing this," he said, "for 3 months. The language, how to say it correctly." He held her eyes. "I find I have constructed it down to almost nothing. The accurate version is very short." "Then say the short version," she said. He looked at her. "Marry me," he said, "not as a strategic alliance, not as a resolution to the social situation, as a choice, mine entirely, made because you are the only person I have encountered in 20 years of public life who speaks to me as if the rank is beside the point, and because you were right about the 1857 survey, and because the shop is yours and should remain yours, and because I have been coming here at 3:20 twice a week for 7 months, and I am not willing to stop." A pause, and in the pause everything. The 6 months, and the dinners and the river fog at 5 in the morning, and the 3 women with their warm concern and the federal report, corrected on the basis of something she had said in a dry goods shop. "I am asking rather than announcing. I want the choice to be yours." She looked at him for a long moment. "You said almost nothing," she said. "That was not nothing." "No," he agreed. "It was the short version after 3 months of construction. The long version would take considerably longer." She looked at her shop. The bolts of fabric and the order book and the curtains finished on the table, and the bell above the door and all the ordinary things of the ordinary life she had built with both hands from what she had available, which had turned out, against most expectations, to be sufficient, and which was about to become something different, not smaller, not replaced, but added to, the way a room is added to when a door is opened that was previously closed. "The shop stays," she said. "The shop stays," he confirmed. "And I will continue to correct you when you're wrong." "I am," he said, counting on it. "And you'll give me fair warning before things pull." "Always," he said. "From now forward, always." She crossed the counter's length between them, not the formal distance of a transaction, the actual distance, the space between 2 people who had decided, and put out her hand. He took it, both of his around hers, the way he held things he had decided to keep. "Yes," she said, "I'll marry you." He looked at her. The warmth in his face was fully present, nothing managed or contained, the complete version of everything she had been watching arrive since a Tuesday in March, when she had handed him a coat and told him it would say, "I've stopped caring what you think." She had been right about that. She had been right about most things. "Good," he said, simply, the one word that was the entire word. She left her hand in his, and the shop was quiet, and the afternoon light came through the front windows with the quality of October light in Savannah, clear and particular and honest in the way that James had said once about river fog. Everything visible from a greater distance than usual. They were married on a Saturday morning in January in the small Methodist church on Abercorn Street, which Violet had attended since childhood, and which held, in its plain wood and whitewashed walls, the particular quality of a place that asked nothing decorative of the people inside it. It was not a large wedding. She had not wanted a large wedding. She was a woman who had spent years making other people's occasions beautiful and had decided that her own should simply be honest.